Hi, I'm Abby, I have a lot of records, and this is Vinyl Monday. So welcome back, or welcome if this is your first time here. Vinyl Monday is the who, what, when, where, why, and how do I feel about classic albums in my collection. If TV show length episodes aren't your thing, don't worry. I also do Vinyl Monday in 60 seconds here on my channel, over on my Instagram, as well as TikTok. Welcome to the second episode of my birthday month. We're less than a week out from the anniversary of the day in which I crashed into the world, which also happened to be the day in which Austin Powers' The Spy Who Shagged Me was announced as the #1 film in the nation. That wasn't some kind of omen, not at all! Since this is the second episode of the month, and Gemini is the sign of the twins, I could not resist rolling two albums into one episode. These two were released so close together, March and November, a little too soon to be Irish twins. The second is an elaboration on the first, maybe even a do-over if the title and cover are to be believed. I wanted to present these two together because I feel they show just how far one band can come in 8 months, and just how different twins can be, like night and day. This week's albums are Love, self-titled, and Capo. Congrats if you guessed these ones. Remember, if you want to play along, all you gotta do is check out my post tab. That's where I post the hints to what the next albums are gonna be. I make announcements, I host polls. You can find all of that on my channel. And if you so choose, you can always read the written versions of my reviews on my website, linked in the description. Alright, beginning with self-titled today. Let's take the plastic off. My copy of Love's self-titled record is an original pressing in mono. I bought this at Retrospin Records in Monroe, Connecticut, the store I broke my boot in. R.I.P. those boots. I grabbed this on my first visit to Retrospin on the way down to a show in Brooklyn like a year and a half ago. Ron is great. Now let's talk about this cover art. The cover of Love's self-titled was photographed by Elektra Records art director Bill Harvey. Contrary to popular belief, this is not the castle Love lived at, nor was it Bela Lugosi's mansion. The reality is far less fantastical, but more intriguing to me. This turret that Brian's leaning against? It's actually a chimney, all that remains of some house that burned down somewhere in Laurel Canyon. In the negative space over here on the left side is the Love logo, also designed by Bill Harvey. One of Love's several contractual wins was having ownership of the logo even after they left Elektra. Bill asserted Love were the first band to have an album cover printed directly onto the cardboard sleeve and the first to have a color photo on the back. Whatever that's worth. It gives a key of who's who, pretty typical for pop albums at the time, and will certainly come in handy when the lineup swells. On Love's first album, we have their not quite original lineup, but for all intents and purposes, the original recording lineup of the band. With Arthur Lee on lead vocals, Johnny Eccles and Brian McLean on guitar, Kenny Forsey on bass, and Snoopy Fisterer on drums. Love's First was produced by Jack Holtzman and Mark Abramson, engineered by Bruce Botnick. Roll transition. The band Love revolved around the brotherly love of Arthur Lee and Johnny Eccles. Both were originally from Memphis and friends from the neighborhood. When both families moved to California, wouldn't you know it, their parents bought houses on the same street. They went to high school together, got into music around the same time, and they formed the American Four, in which they had terrible matching Beatle hairdos together. As future members of Love came up in and around LA, the city became the new center of the American music industry. Record labels were moving their HQs from New York City to LA. American Bandstand moved from Philly to Hollywood. In 1965, we finally had the American answer to the British invasion: folk rock. Dylan nabs from the Paul Butterfield Blues Band to plug in at Newport, and the Byrds hit #1 with their recording of Mr. Tambourine Man. For a couple years there, the Sunset Strip was the epicenter of youth culture in California. You had Ciro's, the Whiskey, the Trip, a little farther out, the Troubadour, all reborn for a hip new young audience. Arthur remembered, quote, "From the mid to late 60s, the Strip was a kaleidoscope of young hearts and music. The Whiskey was the beacon, the shining light that drew the heaven and hell of our generation to the Strip. It was a golden time. When I look back on those days, it's like a psychedelic movie in Technicolor that my mind rewinds and plays, an endless montage of beautiful people. They haunted the haunted house, raised a ruckus at the Hullabaloo, Pandora's Box, and the Brave New World, where the American Four had their first regular gig. This is when they changed their name to the Grassroots, and when they met Brian McLean at popular after-gig grub spot Ben Frank's. Brian himself owned up to being a Byrds wannabe. He dressed like Roger, had Chris's haircut, he really wanted to be in the band, but they already had 2 guitarists, so he settled for being a roadie. When the Byrds flew off for their first UK tour, the one 8 Miles High is about, Brian was suddenly out of a job. He auditioned for the Grassroots and was in the band within a week. Brian said, quote, "I think he," meaning Arthur, "let me join more for who I knew than what I could do. I brought him the whole Byrds scene." Brian also brought in Hey Joe, a song David Crosby brought to the Byrds and was desperate for them to record and release as a single. So established the other axis love existed on: the brotherly love of Arthur and Johnny, and the sibling rivalry of Arthur and Brian. Both Arthur and Brian were only children of single mothers. They never had to vie for attention at home. Both were accomplished and competitive young songwriters and musicians. Both were stylish young men who often found themselves fancying the same girls. More on that later. Jack Holtzman said, quote, "I think Arthur brought out in Brian what he couldn't bring out of himself. It was complementary, but it was more than that. They were creative irritants for one another in the best sense. I don't think either could do what the other could, but there was a context big enough to hold them both, and that was love. They did love each other, but they got on each other's nerves like no one else." Now, who does this relationship remind me of? One of the big myths is that Brian replaced future Manson associate Bobby Beausoleil in the Grassroots. The truth was, Bobby wasn't ever really reliable enough to be in the band. He missed more Grassroots gigs than he ever played. Now, with the Byrds out on tour, there was a sudden power vacuum on the Strip. The Seeds, the Leaves, the Grassroots, lots of plant-related names, and another integrated group, the Rising Suns, are all vying for the Byrds' top dog spot. There weren't many integrated groups in pop music at the time, even fewer on the LA scene, let alone a guy wearing two-tone sunglasses with a leather jacket and skinny pants. Their timing was just right. The Watts riots in 1965 brought civil rights issues to their doorstep. These kids were shown, hey, maybe we're not immune to the civil rights issues happening in the rest of the country. California isn't immune to the same injustices the rest of the country is seeing. And remember, the music industry was still largely segregated in the mid-60s. You had your occasional crossover hit, your Motown artists, but black music was still largely relegated to R&B or soul charts. With this folk rock thing and the LA look, him and Johnny pretty much guaranteed that any group they'd be in could not be pigeonholed into black music. Arthur wanted to spread a message of unity and tolerance with his group, and to visually reflect the eclectic style of their music. Though both Arthur and Johnny were adamant that their audiences cared more about their music than the color of their skin, and I believe it, their presence and their band being both black and white broke down a racial barrier on the Strip. Quote, In our band, there were 2 black guys from Memphis raised in LA and 3 white guys from California. The more I thought about it, the more it seemed that this was the way the world should be, with everybody getting along with one another. I'm glad I tried to show unity in the world. The Grassroots move up to a residency at Ciro's, but they won't be called the Grassroots for much longer. As the story goes, the guys apparently blew off a drunk Lou Adler at a club one night, his revenge, forming his own Grassroots and getting not 1, but 2 nationwide hits with them. The real Grassroots couldn't do jack shit about it. All they'd thought to do to register their name was to mail themselves an envelope with it written inside. In an interview in 1970, Arthur had this to say about losing the Grassroots name. Quote, "The vibration that I got wasn't very good. So instead of reacting in the normal way that I would if someone stole something from me, I chose to do just the opposite, which was love." Another version of the story states that as the guys drove down the strip, they passed a billboard for Love's Braziers. Brian said Love would be one hell of a name for a band, and that's how they settled on Love. Love graduates from Ciro's to the Unicorn. No, wait, Cosmo's Alley. No, wait, Beatolitos. And they drew such a crowd at this point that the line to get in went around the block. The club blocked off the alley, ran a PA outside, and charged people admission to dance in the street. Beatolitos was charging people to get outside the club. That's how big of a deal Love were in LA. This is where Elektra Records exec Jack Holtzman first saw them play. He describes feeling relieved because, quote, "I had finally found my group. If I could, get them." Later, quote, "I asked myself the questions I always ask. Do I like this? Is it something I haven't heard before? Do I think this is going to be fun? Can I deal with these people?" I reasoned that the answer was probably yes to all of them, so I made Arthur an immediate offer. It was instinctive, as these things often are. Since Beatolitos didn't actually own that alley, the fire marshal kept coming around. The club owner finally told Love they had to move on. He couldn't afford the fines. The original bassist left to get a big boy job, and Kenny Forsey joined. Kenny's roommate, Snoopy Fisterer, also starts coming around. Love didn't really want Snoopy in the band, but their actual drummer Don Conca was hooked on drugs and becoming increasingly unreliable. They needed someone to sit in. On January 4th, 1966, Love became the second ever rock and roll band to sign with Elektra, after the Paul Butterfield Blues Band. Now, there's a lot of myths surrounding the terms of Love's recording contract and what they did with the advance, so let's clear that up. Elektra originally signed Love for 1 year, with the options to renew years 2 and 3 at discretion of the label, and a minimum of 14 original compositions per year. Thanks to some sage advice from the band's lawyer, from Ronnie, and from Little Richard, Love retained their publishing rights and ownership of their masters. For Love to get this kind of ownership right out of the gate in 1966 is a huge fucking deal. Elektra was the only label willing to do this for Love, so that's why they signed with them. But somehow, Herb Cohen wormed his way into the deal. The money went through his Third Story Music Company first and took a cut before the band ever got it. Love never got all of their royalties because they didn't read the contract closely enough. Also, the contract stated that all royalty checks should be made out to Arthur on behalf of the group. This caused a lot of problems later on. No, the story that Arthur took the $5,000 advance to buy himself a fancy new car and gave the rest of the guys a measly $100 each is not true. The truth is arguably worse. Snoopy was the one who got just $100 because Love didn't bother to write him into the recording contract. They wrote in Don Conca assuming he'd come back someday. Johnny explained in Anerson's Forever Changes book, quote, "We got the money. Arthur, Brian, Kenny, and I. Snoopy wasn't on the contract. We decided that Snoopy shouldn't have a full share, so the money was split between the remaining 4 of us. Arthur took Snoopy's cut and gave him $100 out of that. Poor Snoopy." On January 24th, Love head to Sunset Sound with Snoopy in tow, not Don Conca, as has previously been said, to record their debut album. Since Paul Rothchild was still in prison for possession, production duties fell to Jack Holtzman and Mark Abramson, with engineer Bruce Botnick around to help. There's also this story that Arthur dictated to each of the guys exactly what they were to play. Again, that's a myth. Bruce Botnick has kind of gone back and forth over the years as to what Arthur was actually like to work with. He has said that Arthur was, quote, dictatorial, also said that Love was always Arthur's show, but then he said that he didn't remember Arthur having an authoritarian leadership style. Quote, Arthur was in charge, but he did it in a very sweet manner. If anybody got out of line, he would just quietly make it happen. Since Love were a very well-rehearsed group, no one had to micromanage them in the studio. The only one lacking was Snoopy. As the hired hand, he wasn't as familiar with this material, and he simply wasn't the same drummer Don was. Not long before Love headed to the studio for the first time, Arthur went to the movies, where he heard Manfred Mann doing Burt Bacharach's My Little Red Book in...
What's new, pussycat?
Wah, wah, what's new, pussycat?
The joke writes itself! Him and Johnny decided Love should do a version. Johnny saw that movie too, and he forgot exactly how the song went after getting out of the theater, so he missed some of the chords and came up with the riff we know and love today. The track listing of Love goes as follows. Opening up side 1, we have My Little Red Book, followed by Can't Explain, then A Message to Pretty, next My Flash on You, then Softly to Me, No Matter What You Do, and side 1 closes with Emotions. Opening up side 2, we have You I'll Be Following, followed by Gazing, then Hey Joe, next Sign DC, then Colored Balls Falling, Mushroom Cloud, and the album closes with And More. When Love's self-titled album was released in March of 1966, My Little Red Book was so obviously the single. It was released in March as well. By Jack Holtzman's estimation, Elektra had only put out about 30 singles in the 15 years they'd been around. The single wasn't really a thing until 1957, and none of them were big hits, which explains their slow growth. My Little Red Book changed everything for Elektra and Love. Jack recounts how, while in Baltimore for business, he heard My Little Red Book on the car radio, and it sounded great. He was so overwhelmed he had to pull over and cry tears of joy. My Little Red Book put Elektra on the map. Everything to follow. Judy's Both Sides Now, Tom Rush's Urge for Going, Light My Fire, all walked the road that this single paved. It became a garage rock staple, being included on one of those 80s Nuggets comps. I definitely have this one. My Little Red Book also worked itself into the DNA of psychedelic rock. Take that riff. Slow that down a bit. Ba 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 da da ba 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 da da ba. That part. Change the key. Ba 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 da da ba 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 da da ba. Interstellar Overdrive, baby! Syd Barrett owned a copy of this album. That's gotta account for something. Love were a breath of fresh air for the pop culture sphere that had gobbled the Byrds brand of folk rock right up. The album peaked at number 52, selling about 150,000 copies, and performing much better in LA. Where the Byrds started to miss out on the top 10, Love were the new kings of the Sunset Strip. They landed a coveted residency at the Whiskey A Go-Go. Of their time on top, Johnny said, quote, "We were living in fantasy land. We went from playing the Brave New World and Beto Litos to dating Playboy bunnies. It started to go to our heads. The 5 simple guys who loved playing music were beginning to change." Headed into April of 1960... Let's take the plastic off. This is Capo, by the way. The cover was once again photographed and designed by Bill Harvey. Once again photographed at the same chimney in Laurel Canyon as last time. If it ain't broke, don't fix it. With the same variant of the same logo, we literally have a different image to work with on the back cover. Besides the hastily slapped on black border, gold picture frame, and 2 extra guys in the mix, the only real discernible difference between the covers of Self-Titled and Capo, this time Arthur has situated himself in the chimney and he's ripping a joint. Okay. Now we are in April of 1966, and the new kings of the Sunset Strip have to have their castle. No, not that castle. Yes, there were 2 castles in LA. Yes, it's confusing. This castle. 4320 Cedarhurst Drive. Arthur had wanted the group to try out communal living, thinking it would be good for their creativity, so Ronnie's realtor friend tipped her off to the property. The place was in the weeds. It was dilapidated, the toilets wouldn't flush. Best of all, it was cheap. Since rent was just $600 a month, each guy's share was only $100. All of the band moved into the castle together, except for Snoopy. There were drugs, there were girls, there was roller skating up and down the halls. Since Arthur was such a homebody, the party just came to him. Arthur wrote most of what would become Capo in this castle, including the song The Castle. Wouldn't you know it? First came 7 and 7 Is, recorded in June of 1966, again at Sunset Sound. It started off as this Dylan-esque love song about Arthur's high school sweetheart, the title 7 and 7 Is referring to their shared birthday, March 7th. But as they worked on the arrangement, Arthur's tweaking the lyrics, and the guys secure an endorsement from Vox, it became something entirely different. Much has been said about this June 17th session. It took anywhere between 30 and 50 takes to get 7 and 7 Is down. This was the session that made Jack Holtzman cry uncle. It was difficult to record, it was difficult to listen to in the studio, it was blessedly short. After this bout of, quote, mayhem, Jack refused to sit in on a love session ever again. Kenny and Johnny worked very hard to get the sound of 7 and 7 Is. Kenny had a fuzz box gifted by Vox that he cranked all the way up. Johnny cranked his reverb and tremolo all the way up and wanted to keep his feedback in tune. Part of why it took so many takes was because the guys were intentionally overloading their Beatle amps to create feedback. Jack and Bruce would keep stopping the guys, saying it was too distorted because they couldn't understand this was how the song was supposed to sound. This was also the song that made Sons of Adam drummer Mike Stewart want to join the band. His group and Love were sharing bills often around this time. He really liked them. Conveniently for Mike, this was also the session that made Love realize, yeah, Snoopy's gotta go. Another reason why 7 and 7 Is took so many takes is because he couldn't keep up. One has to wonder why Love kept Snoopy around for so long if none of the guys particularly liked him and he only really joined the band because he was Kenny's roommate. Arthur took a liking to him. When Mike came around to play drums full time, Arthur was the one who made sure Snoopy still had a role in the band. Moving him over to the keys proved to be a much better solution for everyone. Also, while recording 7 and 7 Is, Love appeared on American Bandstand to promote their previous single, My Little Red Book. Their standoffish attitude and knocking over a set piece backstage ensured they wouldn't get a return invite. Now, given Love's dominance in LA and their good following in San Francisco, management and Elektra were urging Love to tour. Ronnie put together a small tour of the Southwest, beginning with an extravaganza in Dallas. There was a photo op at Love Field, an album signing, the mayor giving them keys to the city. Having a city in the South in the 1960s receiving an integrated band so well really should have made an impression. But Arthur wouldn't budge. There were a lot of reasons why Arthur was so reluctant to tour outside California. He wasn't a fan of traveling to begin with, but I have to clarify this oft-cited quote from him. "Why should I have to go on the road and eat shit for no money?" This has been continually misinterpreted, even in some of the best texts about Love, as this statement by Arthur thinking himself too good for touring. Arthur did have standards. He'd also grown accustomed to his LA comfort zone. He had a good relationship with the promoters and the venue owners. He didn't want to travel all the way to some unfamiliar city, play his ass off, and get ripped off by some sketchy promoter. He clarifies, quote, "I didn't like going on the road and playing for pennies. We were earning a decent living playing in Southern California. It was hard enough getting along with the guys in the first place, let alone going on the road with them." There's also that. And since Elektra had very little experience with a rock and roll group before Love, there was that to factor in. There was no one from artist relations to go and meet them in the city they were going to, no one to make connections with other markets, new record stores. California could be hip to an integrated pop band, but what about the rest of the country? Johnny explained, "Being an integrated group made it difficult for us to play in some places. A black group could play the Chitlin Circuit and places like that in the South, and a white group could go anywhere in the South. But it was different for an integrated group. We could play the West or East Coast, but the Midwest and the South were never big markets for us." All of the above can be true at once, and that is why Love stayed home, choosing to play the same circuit as competition came up around them, and working on their next record. The original version for Capo was for them to go back to their grassroots sound, a more Booker T and the MGs thing, but instead of going back to the beginning, Love went even farther out. By adding Jay Cantrelli on flute and saxophone, they incorporated more jazzy elements into their sound. Arthur was listening to Gary McFarland and Wes Montgomery. Mike also notes that the band were listening to Charles Lloyd together. They likely would have been familiar with him from his gigs at the Fillmore. His Lovin' record from the Fillmore was a surprise crossover hit the next year. Flamenco crept into Love's sound too. Brian's mother had a large body acoustic made for him when he was younger and enrolled him in classical guitar lessons as a kid. And though Elektra's bread and butter was folk at the time, their sweet jam was flamenco. Capo was recorded in September of 1966 at RCA Studio B this time. Since Bruce was contracted to work at Sunset Sound and Paul Rothchild was out of fucking jail, the project went to Paul. When Sons of Adam folded, Mike officially joined. According to his memoir, which I take everything in with a hefty grain of salt because this guy embellishes stories to the point where they are borderline unreadable. According to him, on his first day of the band, he was roped into some classic Arthur and Johnny hijinks. They marched right into Elektra HQ, stating they wanted to be released from their contract. They were unsatisfied with the first album's distribution, and that's valid. It was a modest hit, but since Elektra was such a small label, their distribution wasn't great. As the guys were playing their residency at the Whiskey with a whopping 7-piece lineup now, Elektra uncovered some contractual fuckery. And get this, for maybe the first time in all of rock and roll history, it seems like, it was on the band's part. In hopes of taking Love's talents elsewhere, Arthur spilled the beans and revealed he was only 20 years old at the time of signing his contract with Elektra. Remember, they signed on January 4th, 1966, and Arthur's birthday was on March 7th. Why would this be an issue? I don't see what the problem is. He's not a minor. Back then, you couldn't sign a contract unaccompanied until you were 21. Voided the record deal, and Jack Holtzman was pissed. They had to redraw the whole contract, which Snoopy still wasn't included on. No wonder he had an axe to grind with these guys. Love got another $2,500 advance out of this, but Elektra retaliated. Play stupid games, win stupid prizes, upping their required original songs from 14 to 20. Arthur had to hand over his driver's license so a secretary could make a photocopy, and that could be stapled to the contract. No more funny business. As you can imagine, this little stunt made things pretty awkward with the guys at the label, so it's good that there was an extremely tight turnaround for Capo. According to Mike, they had just 5 days to cut the whole thing. The track listing of Capo goes as follows. Opening up side 1, we have Stephanie Knows Who, followed by Orange Skies. Then Que Vida, Next, 7 and 7 Is, then The Castle, and side 1 closes with She Comes in Colors. Taking up all of side 2 is Revelation. Da Capo was released in November of 1966. The promo single, 7 and 7 Is, was released back in July, backed with number 14. Clever. That peaked at number 33 the week of September 24th. It was Love's highest ever charting single and was promising for the album to follow. Unfortunately, the album to follow couldn't measure up. Da Capo peaked at number 80 on the Billboard charts. John Anerson repeatedly asserts that the sound Love had on 7 and 7 Is had no other context, no equivalent in rock and roll to date. It was totally groundbreaking. He seems to have forgotten one major piece of the puzzle, one that made Da Capo's sound possible in the first place. The Byrds, you fool! Released back in February of 1966, before Love's self-titled, the Byrds' steady artistic evolution and what they came out with on Fifth Dimension massaged the situation for Love. Not to mention a contemporary moment across the pond, the Yardbirds' Shapes of Things. The Stones' Painted Black helped as well. 96 Tears by Question Mark and the Mysterians was on the chart at the same time as 7 and 7 Is. Also in the fall of 66, around the time Da Capo hit shelves, the 13th Floor Elevators' You're Gonna Miss Me was metastasizing into a local hit in several cities after snagging a wider distribution deal. So Love really weren't alone on the arms race to psychedelia. 7 and 7's follow-up single was She Comes in Colors, backed with Orange Skies. Anyone with ears knows it should have been Stephanie Knows Who, backed with Que Vida. Why wouldn't Love capitalize on the jazz/raga rock thing, and budding psychedelia and enforce their own, quote, free rock turn? I have no idea. The order of these singles' release and the fact that Love's peers were catching up to them, it precedes a series of bad decisions and Love's slow downward spiral. Now, Jack Holtzman said that when he was signing a group, he never expected them to be a hit with album number 1. It was always a 3-album investment. The first 2 long-playing records to, build an audience and iron out the kinks of their sound. The third one would be the one that stuck. It seems that the same went for Elektra Records and their rock groups. They needed time to build the audience and iron the kinks out. Their first were the Paul Butterfield Blues Band, the second was Love, and Love themselves handed Elektra their third. That third band would drag the Sunset Strip under the hot lights of the mainstream. It blew the freaking lid off the Laurel Canyon thing. Or should I say, kick the doors in. The Little Brother Band always seems to do that, right? The Stooges were Little Brother Band to the MC5, if we're kind of talking about other Elektra groups to follow. Pink Floyd were the Little Brother Band of the Soft Machine. Love's Little Brother Band became one of the greatest rock and roll bands of all time, with one of the greatest debut albums of all time. The Doors' self-titled hit shelves on January 4th, 1967, 1 year to the day after Love signed their contract with Elektra. Why did Love's trajectory falter? Why did they fall off from 67 into 68? They had this brilliant third album. They proved Jack Holtzman's 3-album rule to be true, but it's a complex issue. Multiple things can be true at once. There was the guys' reputations to take into account. They were young. The fame went to their heads. They got to acting like little shits at times. Cliquey, unwilling to play along with the press. Some accounts say that Arthur resented the Doors for stealing Love's thunder and Elektra's resources away, and he did feel some type of way about the Doors having a billboard before Love. Did Elektra take the money from Love to fund the Doors? There might be a grain of truth in this. Love trashed their goodwill with Elektra when Arthur pulled his little stunt and got their contract voided. From there on out, the label were less willing to put up with everything. Lengthy studio sessions, double albums. Love heard a lot more no's than yeses after one big lie. Though Jack swore up and down that Love didn't make it because they wouldn't go on tours or take part in press, and that is also true, Jack all but admits to removing eggs from Love's basket and placing them in the doors in the Love Story documentary. Quote, "The fact that he," referring to Paul Rothchild, "couldn't make the next album," referring to Forever Changes, had to do strictly with me telling him that we'd been touched by the good fairy and we have the smash act beginning to shape up. The Doors. This is not me having tinfoil hat time. Again, you have to handle this situation with some nuance. Elektra were still so small at the time they signed Love. They had no idea what to do with a rock band. And though Love's little SoCal bubble were more interested in the qualities of their music than the color of their skin, the same couldn't be said for the rest of the nation. Quote, "The sensibilities of the American record buyer were more easily assuaged by the melanin content of that particular group, the Doors, than the ones that we were. So it was easier to sell them, in other words, than it was to sell us. Remember, we're not that far removed from Pat Boone and his stupid cover of Tutti Frutti. If Pat Boone has no haters, I'm dead." Arthur's fears did come from somewhere, but that fear did Love in. At the same time as Capo's release, in November of '66, the Sunset Strip scene began to crumble. Unhappy with their new hippy-dippy crowd, the city put a 10 p.m. curfew in place for minors. This effectively cut off clubs' air supplies. They'd lost their clientele. Kids organized a demonstration in front of the Pandora's Box, a club set to be demolished later that month. The police came to bust it up. This became the riot on Sunset Strip that Steve Stills wrote For What It's Worth about. The city went back on the curfew, but the damage was done. No club crowds, no gigs for Love. Snoopy was finally sacked for good. Jay was also given the pink slip, which I've always found weird, considering the direction Love's music would go in '67. They couldn't afford to pay for 7 guys. Love's fading star had Arthur feeling shaky. His drug use made him paranoid. When the band leaves the castle, he secluded himself in the Trip House. I'm gonna have to put a stop on the story for now. So, what do I think of Love? My first impression of Love was about 4 years ago, when I first heard the album that was still the most requested episode in this show's history, Forever Goddamn Changes. My understanding and opinion of this record has changed enough to warrant a redux, but I'd have to do it under an extremely specific set of circumstances, so my avenue to revisiting Love was the 1966 albums. It's funny, while I, and most of us, know Love from Forever Changes, a studio album by a studio group, Love were a club group in 1966. The self-titled album reflects just that. An active and lively live act. This record's purpose is to capture what they were like in the round and put it on the radio. It shows in how this album was recorded. Of course there's tambourine, this is the mid-60s after all. It was mixed loud. It's supposed to jump out at you because it was supposed to be heard on a car radio. Then the urgent thumping bass line. Then the drums come in on the backbeat, so when they hit, that riff lurches forward. Love set up quite the challenge for themselves, getting it so right so soon with My Little Red Book. It has something rare for a pop single in 1966. It's got edge. It's on the attack. This goes so well with the story that Arthur spins My Little Red Book into. The movie version is in a minor key. It's sappy. Boo-hoo, I'm whining over my girl. Arthur's not whining. He's got his shades on, his leather jacket on, a cigarette hanging out of his mouth, leaning against his car all tough. Well, I just got out my little red book the minute that you said goodbye. I thumbed right through my little red book. I wasn't gonna sit and cry. And we believe that. He punches down on every word with attitude and a little bitterness, hitting the S in say goodbye. It's a little Dylan-esque. Arthur's voice had a lot more depth and vibrato than a lot of his male peers did. Like, Jim Morrison was the other chesty baritone of his time, but his vowels weren't dark like Arthur's, and he had virtually no vibrato. Arthur had a mutable and really interesting voice, and he knew how to play it within the strengths of each song. When the tough guy's act slips in My Little Red Book, he takes out every pretty girl in town from A to Z. Arthur takes on this dramatic effect. His voice was also quite robust. It gives new special dimension to Love's Edge. Then he goes back to the sneer for the next verse. Well, there ain't no girl in my little red book who could ever replace your charms, and each girl in my little red book knows you're the one I'm thinking of. This narrator resents the girl for walking out on him. Furthermore, he resents how difficult she makes it for him to go out and posture and conquer. Now I can't go out and have frivolous fun with the ladies because you're the one I'm thinking of. You for giving me a heart and soul, girl. All that drama over such a relentless groove and maybe the most pointed series of doop-doop-doos I've heard in any pop song makes for a unique, memorable experience. If we're filing the Sonics in the proto-punk lineage, what the hell? Let's add My Little Red Book. It's danceably dark like punk. It has a palatable magnetism. Love ensures we'll want to keep on dancing. After the final chorus, they pull everything back down to the tambourine, then build it back up again. When it's left open on the last strum, our brain automatically fills in that riff. It's tailor-made for you to pick up the needle and drop it back on the beginning again. I know it's hard for me to listen to this song just once. Can't Explain goes way on the Byrds end of things, with twin jangly guitars, some jazzy trilling line on top, a loose groove, and yes, more tambourine. It's propelled along nicely by Kenny Forsey's bass playing, a continually underrated Love ingredient. He was an excellent player and added a point of interest beyond voices and guitars, which early Laurel Canyon rock was so hooked on. Love's brand of jangly is rough. They hasten the tempo, Johnny really wails on those solos, and Arthur's voice is ragged. Songs like Can't Explain and others on this track listing do expose the occasional naivete of early Love songwriting, but because they're not quite so precious with it as a simple song about a girl always wanting to start a fight could be, they get away with it on this particular track. In pop music pre-psychedelia, there was importance on kids having to relate to this stuff. Thus, this is an album of songs that Arthur and Johnny rehearsed in Arthur's parents' garage. Arthur belts out this song like a kid in his parents' garage would. Because Love had a rough around the edges feel here on Can't Explain, I, at almost 27, can enjoy a song probably meant for 16. A Message to Pretty is defined by Arthur's lonesome harmonica. Pretty was his high school girlfriend. Again, this could be a teenage love lost song. It has more depth with the dark and lonely atmosphere and how the song was recorded. The plodding bass line, delicate guitars, Arthur's singing feather-light harmony with himself. Arthur singing feather-light harmony with himself. He also plays with consonants. I go slip, slip, you go slip, slip away. He adopts a wistful, melancholy tone, gently grazing his falsetto with a lot of vibrato. This is the beginnings of the softer side to his voice that he'll almost exclusively use later on. Just when you think you've got Message for Pretty figured out, it ends on this chord. The clouds darken over the song for just a second, and it's a shame we don't get to follow where those dark clouds go. Because that final chord opened the door to something really intriguing, and then it's just shut again. My Flash on You is a rewrite of the Leaves arrangement of Hey Joe, and it retains all the best parts. It is repetitive, but it doesn't overstay its welcome. It's only, 2 minutes and change? Yeah, 2 minutes and 5 seconds. The driving, danceable Hey Joe riff is a prime example of doing the most with the least. Then Kenny comes in with his acrobatic bass playing and levels the whole thing up. He cranks the fuzz all the way up. The chubby tone with ample volume has a lot of weight to throw around, predating what Jack Bruce and Felix Pappalardi are doing with their blues with purple polka dots, or as Corky Lang called Felix's tone, elephant farts. This is also one of Snoopy's better performances on drums. He tended to coast on record. A Message for Pretty, we literally just heard it. His part is so blah. Then you have Arthur hollering over top, wringing his voice out. With conviction and fiery passion, he relays his message. He puts all the attitude out there on a lyric I consider to be one of his thesis statements as an artist. People talk about the way I look. I say, come on and say it. I got enough to write a book. A little clunky, but I can forgive it. You got something to say about my dandy shirts and little scarves? Come say it to my face, motherfucker. Don't they know it's a waste of breath because I don't want to be like them. All I want to be is myself. He's a free thinker outside of LA drug culture. For now. Don't try to force your smuggled drugs my way, cause baby, I cleansed my soul, and that's the way it's gonna stay. The way he raps this out, spitting out the words, it feels like a soul release, and nobody could tell him what to do or when to do it. He was going to act on his own terms. All I want in this world is to say I'm a man that's free. Softly to Me is the sole Brian composition on this record. He had a totally different sensibility than the other players, no roots in rock and roll or the blues. He grew up listening to show tunes. You'd never know it with the dark, exotic guitar flair in the first 15 seconds. It sounds like we're gearing up for an Eastern-inspired excursion, and it does retain that dark, wide pulse underneath. It goes Baroque pop over top. I mean, this is 1966, the year of Baroque pop, but I've never heard anything like this. Brian's lyrics could get saccharine. We're talking about oranges, sugar, chocolate, hot cinnamon, and lovely things and you. Johnny called it chocolate-covered rainbows. Clearly, this song is not radio fare. It's not me you love. It's my darling, you will never know how elegant you'll always be to me. Jack Holtzman said Brian and Arthur had a very interesting relationship with each other, and I'm not so sure that either really appreciated or fully understood what the other offered. Arthur offered Brian approval and an opportunity, and Brian offered something that Arthur really needed, which was a kind of leavening of the intensity. I think he means leveling, because leavening means to rise, but I don't know. It took the scope of the albums and opened it up. The horizons were not tight didactic rock and roll. It suddenly was expansive. And that came from who Brian was. Softly to Me is the first hint of that. This solo is totally in the style of Gabor Szabo. Not the Szabo I've featured on this channel, which is, Spellbinder, Bacchanal, Dreams, those long arcs of sustained feedback, but the Chico Hamilton era Szabo. This solo could have come right from his Gypsy 66 LP, and sure enough, Johnny named Szabo as one of his influences. No Matter What You Do is a total guilty pleasure of mine. I know it's not the strongest song on the album. It's the most you, me, love song here. It's quite sunshiny and way derivative of the Byrds, but it's just so damn catchy. Who doesn't indulge in a little teen melodrama every now and again? I can get my fix from this song. Side 1 closes with a nice little instrumental, Emotions. This became the theme song to the film Medium Cool. Since Love were a club act playing hours-long sets for dancing patrons all night, the singer would have to rest his voice for a few numbers. That's what the instrumental tunes are for. They give the singer a breather and pad some space out between originals and covers. It's kind of Love's take on Apache. With heavy reverb on the guitar and sturdy Western drums, this predates Laurel Canyon's obsession with all things country Western. It's good. You All Be Following is another infectious pop rocker. Arthur's lyrics here are stupid simple, like smack your forehead with your palm simple. Somehow he's got the charisma and the swagger to make it work. Like this, for instance. I went to Georgia, I went to Florida, I went to Missy, tripped on Mississippi, and the name checks of his bandmates too. But when Arthur's bratty talk belt sing breaks into these shiny, pretty harmonies, it wins me over. Arthur's often likened to a poet. He wrote some truly beautiful sets of lyrics in his time. But on gazing, it's evident that he hasn't quite honed his craft yet. I mean, no one is Bob Dylan right out of the gate. He was only 20 years old when he recorded this, and even younger when he wrote most of these songs. What I love about Arthur's future writing for Love is that he could take the flower child thing and give it a dose of realism. He could stand outside the whole thing, looking in and say, hey, this free love utopia isn't all it's cracked up to be. Gazing is that free love utopia. Mulatto soul so rare, intercepted by gravitation through the mist like air. What is this? What is this even saying? Knowing what pop writing and delivery he's capable of on this record and knowing the maturity he steps into elsewhere, I have very little patience with starry-eyed and nothing to back it. The Flower Child fluff is excruciating, and so is the Faye delivery. My main problem with this album is that there is a lot of filler. That is just the reality of a pop record at this time, you know, as we're making the changeover from Rubber Soul through Pet Sounds, where we have that album mentality that just didn't exist yet. We did not need a cover of Hey Joe here, especially when we have My Flash on You, a rewrite of Hey Joe. And this Hey Joe is indistinguishable from the Birds arrangement, which in and of itself was indistinguishable from the Leaves arrangement. There are 14 songs on this 36-ish minute album, and a decent chunk of them on side 2 are utterly forgettable. Like Colored Balls Falling, I couldn't sing that back to you. And having And More as the closer is such a letdown. Some of these songs just hit the same notes. I know Love were required to put out 14 original compositions a year, 12 of them are here, but I would have yoinked this redundant Hey Joe cover and put a better foot forward with some better originals. As we'll see from the next record, we know Love were writing a lot in 1966. I struggle to believe that this was the pool we had to pull from. Then you have something fucking incredible like Sign DC. It's an anti-drug PSA using Love's own drummer as a warning. DC is Don Conca. Look out, Joe, I'm Fallen name drops one of Don's friends. It's pretty heavily indebted to the Animals recording of House of the Rising Sun, but this is subject matter that Love would continue to reference on songs like Live and Let Live and You Set the Scene. This haunting imagery, delivery, and arrangement is darkly ironic when you consider the turn Arthur's own life would take down the road. His writing often possesses a chilling self-awareness, which is another thing I love about it. I can't unfold my arms, I've got one foot in the graveyard, is a reference to Arthur seeing people outside their gigs sitting along the walls with their arms folded up, nodding off after having gotten a fix. My come down I'm scared to face. I've pierced my skin again, Lord, no one cares for me. A man forgotten by everyone and everything, his own ego, his dignity, even his God. I have always appreciated how Arthur writes in stark images that stick with the listener. I'm still thinking about the blood that mixes with mud and turns to gray on A House Is Not a Motel. John Savage made this great connection in his 1966 The Year the Decade Exploded on January 17th. An American B-52 carrying 4 hydrogen bombs crashed into a Boeing Stratotanker off the coast of Spain. 3 bombs fell on the coast, 2 of them detonated, polluting the land, 1 did not, the 4th was lost at sea. Stay with me here! A week after the Palomares incident, Love headed into the studio to record their album, which has Mushroom Clouds on it. This connection isn't too far of a stretch. Arthur said he wanted Love's music to reflect the times. Johnny said, Much of Love's music is actually a newsreel, memorializing the times in which we lived. Mushroom Clouds has another gorgeous, minimalist arrangement with Arthur's double-tracked voice. He fully embraces that falsetto and keeps that thick vibrato, but with a lot of air in it. That's rare for a voice with such a robust low end. Such an airy, light delivery makes one think of ashes falling like snow on a nuclear winter, little children dying in an age of hate and war. We can love again, only God knows when. This reminds me a lot of, Wouldn't You Know It, mentioning the birds again. I come and stand at every door, the poem that I believe Roger set to music for Fifth Dimension. Both songs pay homage to the caskets we didn't see on TV. Love knew how to write an amazing anti-war song. A House Is Not a Motel was abrasive and gory. Mushroom Clouds is a totally different side to them, but is no less powerful. When albums have such a strong opening track, I get worried. This is why. There's a lot left to be desired from Love's first album. Arthur's got his voice and delivery down. He's reaching at who he'll be as a songwriter, but the writing isn't quite there. We haven't quite figured out where Brian's chocolate-covered rainbows come into the mix. The guys can play, but the arrangements haven't quite blossomed yet. One thing is for sure, Love can rock. If you're the kind of pop listener who doesn't care for scrutinizing the lyrics, then you'll probably get a little bit more out of this than I did, but you'll be missing the power of some of these sobering moments like Sign DC and Mushroom Clouds. This thing is a true mixed bag. It's a good album with good songs, and the good stuff will stick with you for years to follow. Capo, on the other hand, I'm honestly flummoxed by this album's potency, the successes of its stylistic shift, and still retaining the group's sound. You can hear Love were like little sponges soaking up all manners of influences. It's clear these guys had jazz music in their ears. All the cool kids on the strip did. The Byrds were getting high in their van listening to Africa Brass. The Doors liked bossa nova. Stephanie Knows Who is surprisingly agile in its shifts between keys and time signatures. You can tell the scene was into Baroque sounds too. Snoopy opens the record with his harpsichord part, setting a 3/4 time. I believe that's Brian on the jangly guitar part. He favored a folksy style, but it gets hard to decipher which guitarist plays what on these early records. On the first, they were practically indistinguishable from each other, but on Capo, in certain places, you start to hear Brian and Johnny's playing styles pull apart. Stephanie Knows Who begins in an insidious, not very danceable waltz. The buzzing, descending riff that could have been played by Jay on saxophone just as easily as Johnny on guitar. As we'll hear in this song, the two meshed fabulously. Brian and Kenny pull a lot more weight on Stephanie Knows Who than people give them credit for. The intricacy of their guitars leads to the unsettling feeling, but Kenny, sticking to the descending riff, gives it an anchor. Arthur howls, yelps, and almost screams his lyrics, surrendering himself to the destructive anxiety. Like the narrator of My Little Red Book, Arthur is angry. This girl means so much to him and inspires so much. What can I say, dear Stephanie? Who shall I next inform of love and poetry that you bring? Your eyes, your hair, your everything. The riff anxiously rocks back and forth, and there might be something off about this girl too. Aches and pains, they clawed your side. A tiger did, you said it did. This came from a frankly bizarre lie that the real Stephanie told Arthur to explain her stretch marks. She said she was attacked by a tiger. It sounds like being with this girl was a head trip, and she gets under his skin. What am I now, dear Stephanie? Am I you in disguise? The arrangement works to this unsettled feeling. It kicks up the tempo for the groovy instrumental break, throwing in an extra beat to make it 4/4 as the song ramps up, then it breaks into 5/4 time and an exciting Johnny and Jay duel. You can tell Jay is more comfortable in the jazz format and the jazz sounds. He was a jazz player player, so his solo is confident and harmonic. Mike is confident too. His playing can actually keep up with the time changes. Johnny is stretching his legs, trying out a sound of his own. You can tell he's mimicking stuff he's heard from trumpeters and jazz guitarists. He plays these tight knots of notes. Next is, once again, the only solo Brian composition on the record, Orange Skies. It's based on the Birds arrangement of Pete Seeger's arrangement of the Bells of Rimini, kind of a Russian nesting doll kind of deal. I think this sequencing choice was deliberate and very smart. Where Stephanie was love with too many strings attached, Orange Skies is love with too few. It's too good. It's too sweet. You make me happy. Everything comes naturally. It's totally the honeymoon phase. Where Stephanie was rock flirting with jazz, Orange Skies is love's second direction. Totally Baroque pop. This sequencing choice makes both songs more potent and exalts both their strengths. It's so delicately crafted, handled by pretty finger-picked electric guitar, and it's almost sunshine pop with that flute. Arthur taps into the delicate side of his voice to deal yet another confection theme set of lyrics from Brian. Orange skies, carnivals and cotton candy and you, and I love you too. Dude must have had a crazy sweet tooth. Another Baroque pop confection comes with Que Vida, complete with a cartoony from Elektra's library of sound effects. Que Vida glides along with organ, gently strummed rhythm guitar highlighting inquisitive chords, and textured drumming that piques the ear when Mike focuses on the cymbals. Of course there's more flute. It might be twee to some, but I don't know, I like it. As I listen to Orange Skies and this, I notice that Arthur hasn't got much vibrato in his voice anymore. He's singing this pretty clean and straight. We also start to hear Arthur slipping things in to shatter the illusion of the straightforward pop song. Yes, my heart was beating, or was it just repeating? What a wonderful turn of phrase. Am I making my own way in life and following the beat of my own drum? You know, literally the muscle beating in my chest, or is this the path that every man goes down? The 60s were a hyper-individualist decade, and the boomers were a hyper-individualist generation. In the 70s, this image shattered. This little line is Arthur starting to write from outside himself, which was one of his strongest qualities. I once had a girl. She told me I was funny. She said in your world, you needed lots of money and things to kill your brother, but death just starts another. This could be a line about resurrection. The song's title is Que Vida, meaning what a life. Clever. This could also refer to the dog-eat-dog world of the music industry, needing lots of money and things to kill your brother. Take out your competition. Rock and roll will always dispose of its last messiah for its next. 7 and 7 might be my favorite song Love ever did. It's really hard to choose, but it plays to all my tastes. Raucous, rough and ready, garagey proto-punk. Now that I think of it, I might be more willing to call this proto-punk than My Little Red Book. Flashbulb bursts of heavy reverb guitar light up 7 and 7, and Kenny's slides up and down the bass on the octaves act as takeoff ramps, sending each wave of sound up. This was the best Snoopy ever played on a Love record. I'm glad the guys recognize such in retrospect. The drums rumble and burst under the guitars slashing away. Lyrics about Arthur's childhood capture all the excitement of being little and letting your imagination wander. When I was a boy, I thought about the times I'd be a man. I'd sit inside a bottle and pretend that I was in a can. I've always interpreted this as little Arthur pretending he was a cosmonaut or a bomber pilot, the can being his spaceship or his plane. The song certainly invokes aviation and air warfare. Sounds of pressing the buttons on your imaginary console, counting to 4 before the final rave up. He's imagining himself as a hero to escape his reality. In my lonely room, I'd sit in my mind with an ice cream cone. A surreal depiction of the cone-shaped hat that his mom would make him wear when he misbehaved. A dunce cap is crazy work. It's a lonely reality, if you're a weird kid or if you're simply an only child like Arthur was. If I don't start crying, it's because that I have got no eyes. My father's in the fireplace, and my dog lies hypnotized. When Arthur's dad was around, he'd get home from work and watch the fireplace every night. So would the family dog. The song was cut at sunset, explaining Bruce's presence and his edition of the explosion. It was actually a gunshot from Elektra's massive catalog of stock sounds, slowed down to sound like an H-bomb detonating. Johnny plays us out in a gentle return to reality, inspired by Santo and Johnny. The guys busted their asses to put all this energy, life force, and maybe a little violence into 7 and 7 Is. This is maybe one of my favorite singles of the whole decade. Part of the Castle's very sparse lyric is, once again, inspired by this Stephanie. What sticks with me is just how much love we're doing in 3 minutes. We've got harpsichord, we've got multiple clashing time signatures, we've got busy bass playing, at least one leitmotif, classical guitar, and 2 false endings. The mystery of the Castle is never solved. It feels like about 6 songs stitched into one and captures what I think living in the castle must have felt like. Popping into different rooms decorated in totally different styles and colors to see who's doing what. Speaking of styles and colors, She Comes in Colors was about another one of Arthur's girlfriend and her brightly colored outfits. I've always thought this song went on just 1 minute longer than it should, and what do you mean this song is only 2 minutes and 46 seconds? Considering what's going on, it slightly overstays its welcome. There's only so many times I can hear,
Whoa, 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 my love, she comes in colors.
and the same little flute ditty, but Mike's performance is varied. That's interesting to listen to, and I quite like the motif that the harpsichord and the flute play together. All of side 2 is taken up by a 17-minute rave-up called Revelation. This is one of those instrumental cuts they'd play to pad out their hours-long sets. It was supposed to be a jam on a John Lee Hooker thing, a horny jam, also inspired by the Stones' Going Home. But if you asked Arthur, no! The Stones stole a sidelong song from Love when they saw Love perform at the Whiskey. They totally stole this idea from this album that came out in November of 1966 for their own album that came out in April of 1966. There's also this story that Revelation was another stunt by Arthur to withhold songs from Elektra. In reality, it was an ill-advised venture based on the burgeoning trend of the day. Love themselves regret giving an entire side of Capo to Revelation. No one liked this thing. Arthur said the version on the album is the worst they ever did it. Snoopy called it, quote, a piece of shit. But according to Love, it was actually bad because of Paul Rothchild. Quote, what Paul did was record 45 minutes of this jam, but instead of leaving it alone and just cutting the end off, he hacked the song up into mishmash so you can't get the feeling for what we were trying to do. If it had been done the way we performed it live, it would have been a whole different song. He just spliced everything to bits and changed it all around. This would have had to have been hacked up to not only fit on one side of the disc, we have the physical limitations of this format to account for, mind you. It has to be interesting enough and have the momentum to warrant the space. Snoopy opens and closes the piece with a fugue from Bach Partitia that was cut and pasted to give this thing a beginning and end. It doesn't sound like Mike wants to do his drum solo, and that's because he didn't. Quote, the Bible says, it's harder for a rich man to get into heaven than it is for a camel to pass through the eye of a needle, or something like that. Same analogy could be drawn to drum solos. The ones worth listening to are really rare. I honestly don't think God planned for drums to be a solo instrument. I love when bands go on lengthy excursions, side-long excursions that feature many players, many movements, many things. There are certain places on Revelation where the guys have chemistry, especially when Arthur goes on his blues man howling thing and pulls out his harmonica. The most exciting thing that happens is the time change with Jay's saxophone solo, but that's already several minutes in. Overall, this Revelation is none such. It lacks chemistry, continuity, and direction. Evaluating this thing is tough. Side 1 of Capo is such a leap forward from self-titled. When I sit back and I pair these albums side by side, these highs are higher and the lows are not as low. For 6 tracks in a row, Capo has a high ceiling and a high floor. They built this fantastic momentum and then they hit us with revelation. It keeps what would otherwise be a stellar album from achieving such. Such are the Pains of Love. They possessed immense talent and skills rarely seen in the pop sphere at the time. But this band just could not get out of their own way. But the energies Love put out into the world with their first 2 albums loosened the brick at the bottom of this massive shift in rock and roll. First was a jangly but still ragged pop record, one of the first signals sent from LA to the rest of the world to show us that California is way more than just surfing cars and girls. The songwriting powers of Arthur and Brian, Arthur the brooding poet-to-be and Brian the flower child, create a really interesting combination of lush pop tunes, rockers, and moody ballads. Then you have Capo, one of the first mainstream rock records to smash together jazz, flamenco, baroque, and that certain element of darkness is starting to push its way through the surface. Both albums present an adventurous spirit and inspired sound that Love's peers and all the groups they would go on to inspire would eagerly gobble up. There's a seed planted on Self-Titled, nurtured on Capo, and ready to burst into a rare and delicate bloom. My personal favorites off the first record are My Little Red Book, Can't Explain, No Matter What You Do, and Sign DC. Oh, and Mushroom Clouds as well. My favorites off Capo are the entire first side. Stephanie Knows Who, Orange Skies, Que Vida, 7 and 7 Is, The Castle, and even if it's just like a little too long for me, she comes in colors. Remember, if you want to keep up with all of my favorites from all the Vinyl Mondays, I have a Spotify playlist linked in my description. I update it every week. And that's it! That's Love in 1966. What do you think of this album? What do you think of this album? What do you think of Love? Leave a comment letting me know. I love hearing what you guys have to say about albums that I love. And remember, despite what some guy on the internet says, your opinion matters. If you like what I do here, you should like this video and subscribe to my channel. I post new episodes of Vinyl Monday, Monday mornings at 11, a new episode of my podcast every other Friday at noon. That's why my voice is absolutely shot right now, is because I just recorded one of those before this. And if you so choose, you can become a member of the freaking Peanut Gallery, my Patreon, where you get uncensored versions of these episodes that really came in handy with last week's pick, The Soft Machines first. There are also extended versions of these episodes by way of just YouTube's copyright system versus Patreon's, and you get an exclusive video every month. It gives a little extra support to what I do. Thank you so much for watching, and I'll see you guys next time. Bye!